Welcome to Season 2 of the Revolution podcast, where I, your host Ryan, sit down with industry experts to discuss the latest trends in e-mobility, clean tech, and the future of transportation. For Season 2, we've made a few subtle changes. Firstly, we've upgraded our production equipment, so the podcast audio quality should be enhanced. Secondly, we've introduced a quickfire round at the end of the podcast, where we can squeeze a few extra nuggets of insights from our guests. Finally, we'll be publishing the podcast on Fridays going forward. Today I'm joined by Dosanna Wu, a product marketing manager for the developer and enterprise unit at TomTom. She joined TomTom in July 2019 after finishing her MBA in France at INSEAD. Before her MBA, Dosanna was an independent consultant in financial operations. Dosanna is based in San Jose, where she brings routing and tracking products to life for the mobility sector. Into the episode we go. Thank you for joining the podcast, Dosanna. It would be great if you could start by introducing yourself and your role at TomTom.
Sure. So before TomTom, I actually started my career in accounting and finance.
Okay, so quite a big difference to what you're doing now.
Yeah, so I started at KPMG, one of the big four accounting firms, and did a stint there, continue my career in that direction, worked for an IT distribution company, and then realized that I didn't really love it. Went to business school in France and finished that. Ended up miraculously in the mapping world with TomTom, and that's been pretty exciting. So now I'm in product marketing, which is pretty much a 180 from what I used to do. And and so now I do focus on a couple products, specifically routing and tracking products at TomTom, and I also focus on the mobility market. So being expertise in that market and seeing how we can continue to build our products for it.
Okay, thanks for the introduction. Deep diving into TomTom, I'd love to hear a short description of what TomTom are doing today, where they are today, especially after gaining popularity in the mid-2000s with the PND.
Yeah, it's so funny because so it's especially based in the US. Every time I talk about TomTom, people are like, what, that? Like, I used to have a PND, or I used to have, my GPS in my car. I love my TomTom. How's it doing? Or, oh, your competition Garmin. And so it's really funny. And I always have to say, yes, TomTom still exists and is doing quite well. There's been quite an evolution, as you may know, from the PND days. So TomTom first was the company that did invent digital mapping before our smartphones came around, and now everyone has a when I say PND, it's a personal navigation device. Now they have it in their pockets. So TomTom ended up, focusing mostly on the automotive business and providing map data for OEMs or car manufacturing companies. So the navigation and within those cars, and also now focusing, wrapping all of that data up that we used to also have in the PNDs. And then now you can access them through our APIs. We package and sell those data, that raw data as well, for people that want to do more with it and build their own customized maps or for whatever product they're building.
Right, so TomTom has shifted from a more consumer-facing product to a B2B company with a lot more going on behind the scenes. Are there TomTom products that people would still interact with on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, it is exactly. So I really love working at TomTom for that reason. I think it's like people don't realize that location tech touches every part of their daily lives. So we do have partners that we work with, and one of them that was announced was we just renewed a partnership with them with Uber, for example. So, whenever you're calling, an Uber or something where our data is in there, as well as other products that you might be using or apps that you might be using, is perhaps based on our APIs. And so you don't realize that it's based off of the TomTom maps, even if you don't see it. So even sometimes the way maps work is there's many layers, so you can definitely use other providers. So visually you might be using a different company, but on the other under layers, if you need like road data, for example, or traffic data, it could potentially be TomTom.
Right, so TomTom products are actually everywhere. We just don't interact with them as much as we used to. So an area of expertise I know you have is ride hailing. And before we get into that, are there any significant differences between ride hailing and ride sharing, or are the words simply interchangeable?
It's hard to say. I think everyone has, it's different. It's a little bit nomenclature, so it depends on who is defining it. So we definitely use it interchangeably. If I really want to be precise, I would say that it could be different. Like, so I would define ride hailing as like, like when you're hailing for a taxi, for example, you're getting a ride that's on demand, versus ride sharing. It could potentially be more like a carpool. Like, for example, if you're using a Via van, you're sharing a ride with someone, you're sharing a van or something. Potentially you could share a car, like if you're, those car sharing apps where you can just book a car that might be near you. So I think, ride share could potentially be much more inclusive, but definitely it's used quite interchangeably.
So we'll stick with ride hailing for the purpose of this conversation. Personally, ride hailing was not a term I heard too much before Uber came onto the scene, but nowadays it's something we hear a lot about in the tech space. What has changed to make it such a popular option for consumers?
Yeah. I mean, ride sharing, it's so part of our lives now, right? It's like I'm gonna catch an Uber, Uber here, Uber there, or Lyft here, Lyft there, depend whatever company it is, locally, right? And I actually have friends that don't even own cars anymore, just because they can use their app no matter where they are, and they prefer that. It's like cheaper, more flexible. They could drink all the time. But yeah, so I think in the last 5 years, it's definitely become part of our daily lives. That is very different, and even that it's evolved, right? Like, so ride hailing has, especially in COVID times, has also evolved to like food delivery services, parcel delivery services. So a lot of these companies are using the same drivers to do other type of services. I think also what's changed is that there's a lot more involvement from the government. So when ride hailing first came onto the scene, I mean, it's existed for a bit, and I think the idea has existed for a bit, but Uber was really the company that made it successful. I mean, because in a lot of the markets, they went ahead and scaled directly, without necessarily having the permission from the city or whatnot. And there were many pros and cons to that. And the pro was they were able to scale quite quickly, and also be able to affirm like customer demand, and also be able to continue to generate more demand. And that's why we are where we are here today. The con is that the governments or a lot of the local cities did not have the proper infrastructure, or they didn't anticipate the growth of ride hailing and didn't know what to do with it, right? And then usually when it comes to transportation, even when it comes to the flow of traffic or where passenger vehicles can go, they generally more or less have a sense of how they want to plan it out in the city and where that should go. And I think ride hailing kind of threw a little bit kink into that, because they can also be simultaneously a passenger vehicle, but also like kind of like a bus in a sense. And how do you optimize your city for that when it comes to congestion? How do you optimize it so that it works in conjunction with transit and conjunction with your city, rather than like separately on its own? So I think in the last 5 years, we've seen a lot of that type of partnership evolve. And you'll see also, like, for example, a good example is like airports. So for airports, a lot of cities have now created a whole separate site just for ride hailing companies. So that, and then it's built into the technology where people will request it and it tells you where to go. And it's a much more streamlined process, and it really cuts congestion, but also improves the arrival departure experience for everyone. And I think, of course, a revamping of certain laws and stuff when it comes to employees or, especially when it used to be a taxi-based world. But yeah, so sorry, that was kind of a long drawn explanation of what we've seen in the last 5 years. So I think from a location technology perspective, right, we definitely have a strong role to play in there. You see that there's an evolution of, more consideration for the impact so electric vehicles coming into play, and talks about that. What are the most efficient routes? How to get people from A to B on the time that you promise them? Because when you do have a precise ETA, everyone's happier around you, right? That means it's a more efficient, more productive city.
That's really fascinating. And you touched upon it there with the potentiality of car ownership going down as ride sharing increases. Is there a world in which car ownership completely dies, or will the two options coexist?
Yeah, I mean, that's a tough question because it really depends on the city. I think for certain cities, yeah, like having ride hailing, it's significantly better. In other cities, perhaps it might contribute a bit more to congestion. And some cities are like so far, like if I think of like Dallas, for example, so spread far apart. Maybe having a personal vehicle might be more beneficial in that sense. I'm not sure, right? I guess I don't have the answer for that, but I definitely think it depends. I like to think it's beneficial overall, just because I think it creates more options for people. I think one of the surprising things of ride hailing that I found is that, and when it comes to government planning and transportation planning, is one of the top of mind for city planners is also accessibility. And when I say accessibility, it also means for people that are not are disadvantaged when it comes to finances and not being able to own a car. So are they able to access some sort of transportation that they need? And I think that's fascinating. And I also, when I used to volunteer in LA at a transitional homeless shelter for women, a lot of the women had children and also had to work at the same time. And they used to take public transit, but now they're taking Ubers all the time, and or not just ride hailing in general, right? And I think that has been so significant for their life because they are able to plan better. Transit being notoriously unreliable in Los Angeles, which is where I used to live. And so you can see a lot of the benefits in that sense. So I like to say yes. A long answer to your question is, I think just being able to have that option is always a good thing.
I also think that the US is a bit of an anomaly in that state legislatures make a lot of the decisions for their own states rather than at the federal level. Therefore, you have a situation where a policy that works in California might not work in Texas, for example.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think to your point, like it's definitely like I think US specifically is very, very fragmented. And so it's very hard to talk about US as a whole, like to your point. New York, for example, New York City, at least, like it's metropolitan. I would say it's a little bit more like the European cities where it's very condensed and you have a stronger sense of the public transit, the subway and the metro is used much more frequently. It's a much more walkable and pedestrian friendly versus, a rural area. In Illinois, for example, might be harder than you. It's better to take a car in the long stretch of highways. And then I think of, and then Asia, for example, APAC, they tend to use a lot more motorcycles or motorbikes in general. And for them, that's a much more efficient way of travel than any type of other like metro, for example. So I think it's varies so much from city to city and how it's structured.
Indeed, and on the transit point, North America is notorious for not having the most sophisticated and reliable public transport systems. And that's perhaps why ride-hailing or other transport options become so popular and appealing to citizens.
Yeah. I mean, it's so funny. Like I've worked and traveled and studied a lot abroad, and without fail, every time I come back, I feel incredibly inspired to take public transit because I'm like, it's better for the environment, and why not? And so, being from LA, so in Los Angeles, in LA, Orange County area, I would try to take the bus or the train or metro or something, and it was always such a nightmare. It would either take very long, or the bus would not arrive or on time or at all. I'll try it out for a week, and then I will be like, okay, I guess I'll go back to my car.
Yeah, I do feel like there is a long way to go for public transit, and ride-hailing is a great solution to that. Moving on to congestion, which is a topic that features a lot when you scroll through TomTom's website, and seems to be the thing that as a company you're battling the most. How is TomTom working towards changing congestion on roads, and how do you see it improving in the future?
Yeah, I mean, I think like all of our technology, I think at the end of the day, really impacts traffic and congestion for the most part. So I could perhaps talk all day about each individual product or technology and how it impacts. We could start with traffic. I'm definitely not our traffic expert, but I can definitely speak to a lot of it, which I think is one of our greatest strengths. So in terms of traffic, definitely we have a lot of live, what we call probes. So having users, whether it's their phone or their car, we are able to see like, how fast they're going on a specific road. And so then we can get the live traffic flow, we can have historical traffic flow, and then we can have predictive. And that doesn't sound very unique because I know you can see that like on a lot of these mapping technologies, but I think you also have to weed out a lot of the miscellaneous data in there to be able to get a better sense of the flows. And so a lot of the examples that I have is like, for example, COVID really changed up a lot of the traffic. So our algorithm has to be updated or tweaked to make sure that it's not just taking the historical traffic and predicting it for the future, but also adjusting for what's going on now, as well as for you'll see variations in weekends, holidays, significant events, whatever it is, right? And so those things need to be reflected. And also you have different, when I talk about probes, there's also different driving behavior, right? And do you want to account for all of them? Does that make sense to account for all of them? So you have aggressive drivers, you have conservative drivers, and if you take an average, it may not necessarily make sense. So maybe those are the outliers that you need to remove. So I think what I'm trying to say is like, yes, traffic information sounds very straightforward, but there's a lot of things that go behind the scenes to refine the algorithm so it reflects what you would really expect. So that's just the traffic piece. Then we also, of course, have like everything else that also affects like congestion. So I think what we all really specialize as well too is just map lots and lots of map data in detail. So what I think is really cool and fascinating when I joined TomTom is just also seeing like all the granular type of road data that you can get. So for a road, there's different types of curvature. So how curvy is it? How lumpy or how hilly is it? What's the speed limit? And all of those will contribute back to how you expect a driver to go on the road, and also what kind of car are you driving? Are you driving an EV? Are you driving a truck, a van? So all of that is considered in the road. So that we call that at TomTom, we call that ADAS. Honestly, I don't remember what it stands for, but I think that the technology allows companies to be able to pull that and get a more precise understanding of what they're dealing with in terms of the drive and whatnot. So that's one thing. I mean, besides all the other obvious things, like is it a toll road? Is it closed? Is what time of day? Or is it open? Is it emission-free zone? So there's just a lot of nuances, I think, that really can affect the road and the decisions that people make for their business when it comes to their road as well. Other types of data that we also have is like for each location point. So when it comes to a, what we call POI, a point of interest, an example I always give is like a hospital building might have multiple points of entrances.
Yeah.
And so because of that, you will have like maybe one point where you can receive packages, one point where you receive visitors, one point where you receive patients, doctors, and then one building for cardiology, one building for ER. And so when you do arrive to somewhere like that, where do you go? Where do we park? How do you get there? And that can all contribute to congestion if a driver is circling around the block trying to figure out where they can enter from.
Okay.
And so being able to have that type of level of information helps reduce congestion as well. When you take all of that type of data and put it into a routing algorithm, which is what we do, the traffic, the road information, the point of interest details, then you have a very a better route. Then you can choose a better route. So our algorithm will choose the best route, and this is kind of varies between each mapping company and how they want to route an individual. It could be for very aggressive. It could be the fastest route. So an example I like to give is like I used to use Waze a lot in terms of for commuting, and so Waze will take you through to the fastest route, and sometimes it'll take you through some residential areas or smaller streets. So that's part of their routing algorithm. And so every routing algorithm, it could choose to take you to whatever street we should go on. And their use case is very specific to commuting, typically for commuters, to avoid traffic. So we have our routing also for different use cases and for an algorithm for different reasons. So we really focus on ETA, on meeting the ETAs, on predictability. And so for TomTom, sometimes it's not choosing necessarily the fastest route, but the route that can get you there on time.
Okay.
So sometimes if the fastest route takes you on like a lot of local streets, for example, the local streets can have red lights, a lot of lights that can embed unpredictability. And there's more room for incidents or accidents so that you may or may not be late. If you're on a highway, for example, then you're on a consistent road that is a bit more predictable because there aren't like the lights and signals. And if there's traffic, the traffic is also a little bit more predictable. Like you kind of have a better sense of, the impact. So in that sense, sometimes the TomTom algorithm may choose a highway over smaller local streets. And it's a mishmash of kind of some of those micro decisions that are being embedded into the algorithm, that it's a fast but also reliable route, if that makes sense.
It does make sense, and I feel like you've compressed some really complex technology into words that I can understand. So TomTom appears to be particularly prioritizing the ETA, whereas other companies like Waze might have other priorities. What is it about an ETA that is so crucial to creating a more efficient algorithm?
So I think meeting the ETA is always being able to create predictability. And when you have predictability, then you're able to plan ahead is the idea, right? So, and being able to plan ahead, then you reduce unpredictability, and you reduce room for like, more congestion and whatnot. So the flow should be a bit more efficient, I think, with better ETA. So that's why we really value that, as well as we value having a optimized routing algorithm. So and so being able to do that, will contribute back.
Yeah, I tend to take these services for granted even, and the work that goes on behind the scenes. I also think it's crucial that governments and decision makers take this technology seriously so that we can see more rapid expansion and improved infrastructure.
Yeah. I mean, definitely. We partner with a lot of governments that do end up using some of our traffic data to make better decisions. Or we partnered with companies like Rambo that use our data to consult governments as well, and with their expertise. But I think it is, going on from now, it is a lot of, it's an ecosystem. I think when we talk about mobility, it's not just, one industry or whatever. It's a lot of them coming together to be able to kind of work together and improve as a whole together. I think for TomTom, we continue to try and keep a step ahead of these trends, of the needs, and anticipate and continue to refine our existing products, as well as be on top of the new ones as well. So of course we've been really developing a lot of our EV products too, in anticipation for the EV revolution, right? So we have EV long distance routing, for example, that you can tailor the routes to what kind of EV electric vehicle that you do have. And you can see the charging station. So it makes it much easier to get around and drive long distances when you do have an electric vehicle. So we are innovating in that sense, at least for our company. And contribute back to our mantra of a congestion-free world. But at the same time, also, we're seeing the needs of the community and how mobility continues to develop.
So I'd like to shift the conversation towards North America. And with TomTom being originally a European company, how has this impacted the North American market and team who are trying to grow its presence within North America?
Yeah, I mean, so I have a lot of early mornings with calls with you, but in reality, TomTom is very much a global company. I forgot how many countries we're present in, but it's quite a large, many number of countries. We have an office in Taiwan. We have offices in India, and just so all over, as you can imagine. And I think we try to maintain that global perspective, especially when it comes to mapping. It makes sense to try and keep that. And so a lot of people do like us because we are able to help them scale when they are expanding globally. So I would say that's one of our strengths. As for me personally, working for a European-based company, I don't know. Like I said, I think it is very just globally minded. And so that's why it doesn't necessarily feel per se European specifically. And I work with different people all the time from all over. There's quite a bit of diversity. So I really love that, I think.
That's good to hear that there's a global perspective regardless of the different markets that TomTom is present in.
Yeah. And I think a lot of the customers we tend to work with also are globally focused. And so, even if they do have an office in North America or Europe, they also have offices around the world that they also need the technology. And so, so even though I guess it doesn't feel like there's a significant difference, I think a lot of the message is very similar, right? I think we all want to accomplish very similar goals of really like optimizing travel efficiency and trying try to get the best data to get us there.
Great. So now for some quickfire questions to finish the podcast. What, in your opinion, is TomTom's most important product or service?
All of them really come from the base, and that's our core maps.
Yeah.
And I've talked about that a lot. And our map has all this very, very rich and granular data when it comes to the road networks, when it comes to different points of interest, highways, whatever, what have you, right? As well as our traffic data. So between those pieces of data, then we create different services out of that, whether it's, routing or map display or geofences, which are these virtual fences. It's all kind of related, but it starts really with the base. And I would say the core of our maps is our strength, and everything that comes out of it is great. And of course, I will say that.
I thought you might. So going on to the next question, where will TomTom be in 5 years?
That is definitely a tough one. I definitely hope and expect TomTom to be kind of more at the forefront of partnering with and being a partner and a significant presence in the mobility ecosystem, because we do have a lot to contribute in terms of our expertise and our background. And so I think we will be in 5 years even more involved. I think kind of going back to what I said about our product, I did forget to say, like, one of the most important part of our product is also that we do partner with companies a lot. So with our data, we do partner in terms of innovating and co-innovating together. So it's not like you just take our product and then plug it into yours. It's like, okay, how can we reshape this so that it fits with your business model? So I think in 5 years, how that evolves to look like is we would be more at the forefront of the innovations that are needed when it comes to the ecosystem and the businesses that are thriving there.
Okay, so the next question is interlinked when discussing the future, but I know that TomTom has some technology catered towards autonomous vehicles. I know that you're not necessarily an expert in that field, but how far do you think we are from having fully autonomous vehicles on the roads, and how will TomTom adapt?
Sure. Well, I'll start with that last question first, because I know that we do have HD maps, which are quite significant for autonomous vehicles, in addition to whatever LiDAR technology that they're using. I don't know. Otherwise, I'm not super well versed in autonomous vehicles, since I'm on the more of the data side. But I do say, autonomous vehicles are heavily trending. I always see it like it's quite significant in the mobility world, right? With trucks, the long haul trucks going autonomous and electric as much as they can. I was driving on the freeway the other day, and in San Francisco, and I saw this truck. Which I didn't see a driver, so I'm assuming I think it was like a testing vehicle. I'm not so sure. I know there's a significant. I think Waymo has been testing significantly in Arizona, if I recall. I think we're close. I mean, I'm very hopeful. I think it's really exciting. But I do hear some of the nuances of the test, and there's still some ways to go. I have friends that also have Teslas, and they've shown me some of the autonomous features there, and it's quite exciting. But I would say I'm very hopeful, and I think it may enter, and this is just me, it's not common, but I may see it entering more first in the fleet space, which makes a lot of sense, because there's a lot less risk with the long distance drives, and at least that's the way I perceive it. So I don't have a number, but I feel like we're close, and I'm very hopeful. I think we're closer in autonomous vehicles than we are with drones, at least.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there. So the next question is slightly different, but I do think it is important to discuss in the current climate where people are much more open talking about diversity. The automotive industry is one that has been dominated by men in the past, particularly in more techie roles, but we're seeing more diversity in recent years. How would you encourage more women to pursue a similar career?
I really appreciate this question. And I wouldn't say it's even just automotive. I would say the tech industry in general could use a lot more women. And I guess my encouragement to women is that I don't know. I actually don't have any whys per se. I mean, I think if it's an interest to definitely pursue your interests, I think there are companies like TomTom, for example, that really encourage and pursue diversity and value it. So I do work with a lot of product managers that are women, and they're incredibly intelligent and smart, and I really enjoy working with them. And I think they bring a lot of value and different perspective. And so I guess for women, I guess I would say that it's important to have you in this industry. I think it's needed because the more diverse thinking, the more innovative a company can be. I think the automotive industry is also looking to innovate and integrate with technology more and more, right? Especially when we talk about autonomous vehicles. And I think women, and I guess women tend, not just women, but people of different backgrounds will think differently. And coming from an international business school, I really saw that come into fruition, and people came up with some really amazing ideas when we all come together and discuss and vet each other's ideas and challenge each other. And I think we definitely need women in that space to do it.
I completely agree with you, and I do think we'll see even more women and even more diversity in the future. So my final question is in regards to electric vehicles, and I wanted to gain your perspective on whether you see them as the future or whether other technologies like hydrogen will give some competition.
That's funny that you brought up hydrogen, because I actually do have a friend in that field, and he gets really fired up when he talks about hydrogen. He gets really excited, but outside of him, I actually haven't heard much about hydrogen technology. I think it's fascinating, but I definitely see EVs here to stay, and on TechCrunch and other media, I'm just seeing it really boom, and just lots and lots of investment and lots of money really going into this industry specifically. So like I said, electric fleets, electric trucks, and I forgot. I don't know which large manufacturer in the U.S. Automotive company also just got a lot of funding as well for EV. I think it's coming, and I'm really excited because I think it will really change the way we consume, fuel and how we leave our footprint. I think being in California, I see it a little bit more often, but we're seeing a lot of really cool things come out. Like the Hummer has a electric vehicle now, which is quite amazing. Pickup trucks too, the America's beloved pickup trucks. So we're getting there. And I think also countries, not just the US, but are building the infrastructure and the regulations.
Yeah, I also agree that there's work to be done, but the future looks bright for EVs. So we like to finish every podcast by asking our guests whether there's anything they want to plug or highlight a project to look out for in the future. So here's your opportunity.
I mean, definitely please check out our website, look me up, and ask me any questions you might have. Pretty responsive. And we're definitely working on a lot of things for 2021. So keep on a lookout. We have our APIs too, so that if you are a developer, or if you're not, I'm sure there are tools that are easy for non-developers to use with APIs. Definitely check out our routing API and try it out. Check out our EV routing API. And give me a shout. Let me know how you like it, how you don't like it. If you've used, we also have our TomTom apps. I think if you're an Android user, I'm actually not 100% sure of the coverage, but we have our TomTom apps, the Amigo, that you could use, and let me know what you think about the routing navigation technology there.
Cool. So thank you so much for joining the podcast and sharing your perspective.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. This is really great.
I was delighted to welcome Dosanna to kick off season 2 of the Revolution podcast. TomTom are clearly combating congestion, and their technology is a key piece in contributing towards a zero-emission future. Ride-hailing, predicting an ETA, and advanced map technologies are all important factors in creating technology that can create more efficient transportation. We'll be back for another episode soon. Revolution Digital number 3 is just 25 days away. Make sure to register at revolutionconference.com.